Marat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Pleasure to be here.
So what brings you to AEBIOM?
Well, I have been asked to address the future role of bioenergy in European and perhaps more global level energy supply issues, energy security sort of issues. We, of course, don't really tend to look at biomass, bioenergy as a factor of geopolitics in energy, which is very heated, surrounded by very heated debates at the moment, policy debates. The European Parliament is somewhat of a cauldron, you know, if you go into the public hearings on some of the big pipeline projects like Nord Stream, for example, Turk Stream. So I've been asked to come and talk a little bit about this topic.
Where does biomass and bioenergy sit within that geopolitical arena right now? And is there scope for it to become a geopolitical issue?
Well, that's a good question. At the moment, I don't really think we have a role for biomass in the European energy geopolitics discussion. Again, this discussion is very much dominated by kind of EU-Russia relationship, the wider politicization, and really non-energy factors that tend to have an impact on energy markets and energy supply. So when we tend to have a good partnership with Russia and work effectively, when the oil price is not very high, geopolitics tends to sort of go onto the back burner to some degree. But as in recent years, you know, we've witnessed annexation of Crimea or alleged annexation of Crimea by Russia, heavy involvement. Of course, we've had other factors like the Georgia War in 2008 and a lot of other geopolitical factors. This tends to have an impact on energy, and energy security becomes really a very heated debate in Europe. Now, in a more structural way, we can also see that energy supply, consumer supply relationships are dominated by agreements. A lot of these are intergovernmental agreements between states that sort of endorse consumer supply relationships between their national champions or their, Gazprom, let's say, as a national champion, and European energy consumers. So these are long-term agreements. I mean, gas contracts are quite often long-term. They're becoming somewhat more flexible these days in Europe. But to displace these with using, let's say, biomass in one way or another seems somewhat unrealistic. Of course, another issue you have to look at is much of the biomass that is actually used in Europe, biomass energy that is actually used in Europe, is produced inside the EU itself, I think up to around about 95%. Okay, so, you know, Northern Europe, the Baltic states, Finland, you know, they have a lot of wood, a lot of forestry. You know, agriculture, of course, produces biomass energy as a source of supply, in a sense. So we don't tend to have a supply security problem like we do on the gas relationship, because Europe is highly dependent on imported gas. We have Russia as the main supplier, but Norway and Algeria are also key suppliers to European Union consumers. And we don't really have much indigenous production. You know, we have the North Sea, we have the Groningen fields in the Netherlands, but these are kind of, you know, in a state of atrophy. These resources are becoming depleted. They're not necessarily bringing new resources on stream. So we have both an import gap and a security of supply issue on the gas side. And then we have all these external sort of factors, the geopolitics. In biomass, we don't necessarily have that issue. You know, we tend to produce much of what we consume. There's only about 5% of an import gap. So there's not really as much of a security of supply problem. So from that angle, I can't see biomass, let's say, taking a market share, neither in you know, the wider geopolitical discussion, nor in the you know, kind of replacement of indigenous sources, because we do have quite a few sources. And I would add just one more point that you know, there is a, let's say, EU-Russia biomass energy trade. It's nothing by volumes compared to the gas trade, or, you know, the nuclear industry trade, nuclear energy trade between Russia and Europe. oil as well, of course, coal. These are all energy sources delivered from east to west. But the trade that does exist, it tends to be more on a micro level and on what I would call a very sane commercial level. So we don't necessarily have ministers of energy endorsing agreements, between supplier and consumer, or even presidents like you yourself have seen in Istanbul recently. So it's a more normal commercial relationship, quite depoliticized and not really prone to be, pushed through these sort of tensions that we have on the gas side.
So you're the executive director and founder of the Brussels Energy Club. What is that?
Brussels Energy Club is a new platform. It's 5 years old, which is quite new for Brussels, kind of conservative establishment, It's a new platform to engage in debates about energy investments, about energy politics, about how to deal with Russia and with Gazprom, and to do it in a very both in-depth on the one hand, okay, and kind of very neutral to stakeholder views on the other hand. So what I mean is, here in Europe, you tend to have very strong lobbies representing various interests, whether they represent the coal industry or nuclear, gas, whatever, as well as perspectives, let's say, from the European Commission, from their member states. So we tend to get these, message-oriented meetings, high-level people, producing a message of some kind, addressing a big audience, not really exchanging information. I noticed 5-6 years ago, I came to Brussels 8 years ago, that there was a void or a gap for platforms where educated people, no matter what country they come from, no matter what interests they have behind them, can actually sit and talk in a non-emotional way and try to look at the facts and exchange them and digest the facts and exchange a little bit of industry intelligence, if you like, gain some insights, which are not necessarily out in the public sphere all the time. And try to come to a verdict, a conclusion on certain issues. So recently we had a members' discussion, we're a members' club of course, members' discussion on Ukraine. And we wanted to look as to whether the current Ukrainian government as well as EU combined policy of keeping energy transit as much as possible and allowing the government of Ukraine to generate revenue, it's about 1.8 billion euros per year, from energy transit of Russian gas to Europe, whether that is the best source for Ukraine to continue its energy security strategies, or whether Ukraine should look at its proven gas reserves and look at means of attracting investment and liberating those reserves to allow Ukraine to become a gas producer. Okay, it's a very significant gas importer at the moment, Russian gas, although it's going down a bit with the politics there with Russia and energy efficiency strategies also. But if Ukraine can actually move away from this kind of transit umbilical cord and move towards production of gas, where it can satisfy its own needs, so it can actually generate good taxation from private investment actually coming into this sector, and also export gas to Europe, sort of add to that equation. Of course, there's a lot of scenarios here: supply, demand, future of gas. We discussed this already. But we had a very non-emotional debate about this, which involved a presenter from kind of Russian guy, a specialist who works for a Western IOC involved in Ukraine, and he gave us a detailed presentation on this. And then we had discussions with representatives of Naftogaz Ukraine in Brussels, people from Gazprom, people from the Commission, people from the energy companies, some diplomats. So that's kind of our format. It goes for about a meeting, usually 2 hours. And it's also very strong networking. And I kind of describe it, for a consumption of a British audience as something in between Chatham House and the Travellers Club on Pall Mall, if you know this institution for many FCO ambassadors. So they go there to meet, network, make their little deals and wheels and things like that. But Chatham House has the think tank side. And they're very kind of Chatham House rule and non-biased sort of discussion. We don't kind of judge you by the way you look, but we judge you by what you are. So Brussels Energy Club is a little bit like that. And we're a private members club. We're an NGO under Belgian law, so we're not for profit, and we're funded by annual membership subscriptions. Energy companies pay an annual subscription fee of 5,000 euros per year, and that goes into the operation, into the meetings. We have normally a meeting every 6 weeks to 2 months, roughly, something like this. And we're currently, we have interest from quite a few other companies now to become members. We have 5 members at the moment, but we're looking at expanding that, of course. And we should have our Christmas event. We sometimes present a report on Gazprom. There's a lot of interest in Gazprom's activity here in Brussels, of course, so we actually produce monthly analysis publications on Gazprom's external business. So we sometimes end the year with a presentation of this Gazprom report, the annual sort of report. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do.
Marat, we very much look forward to watching your keynote later on today.
Thank you, Matthew. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.